To Deadly Desire, the Brendan Banfield trial. I'm your host, Guy Lambert. The trial already underway today, actually starting a bit earlier, tad bit that is, 9:30 to be exact. Of course, Banfield is accused of conspiring with his family's au pair to carry out a 2023 plot to murder his wife, Christine, and a man named Joseph Ryan. Among yesterday's witnesses was former Fairfax County digital forensic investigator Brendan Miller, who originally disputed a claim that Banfield and the au pair catfished Ryan by setting up a fetish website account in Christine Banfield's name. Miller testified that he changed his mind when the au pair admitted her role in the plot. Testimony, yet again, underway as I speak. Joining us for the very latest is Vernon Miles, who, well, quite honestly, you have been covering it since the beginning. And Vernon, first of all, the trial started a tad bit earlier today.
Yeah, they started a little earlier. They're going to be running a little later. They might be going on Friday, which they haven't done before. All of this is part of an effort to beat the snowstorm this weekend because the judge says we're very close to the end. This could be the difference between a 2-week trial and a 4-week trial because if the snow is as big as we're expecting, then they might only have Thursday next week in court, and then they'd be back the week after that. So.
All right, we're going to talk about what's to be expected today. However, I want to revert back to what took place yesterday. In this case, the blood spatter analyst really caught your attention.
Yeah, there was something kind of funny that they had mentioned that the blood spatter analyst had said, which is that you can't scoop up blood the way that you can't scoop up other liquids and redistribute them somewhere else. This was part of her case trying to poke holes in the prosecution's argument that they had rearranged the scene. I actually went home, which you're not supposed to do if you're in a jury or anything like that, and spilled some liquid on my floor, made my wife kind of upset, scooped it up with my hands just to check and see for myself, and yeah, I was able to sprinkle it around. So I think it's an interesting argument. We'll see what the jury thinks.
All right, well, we know the jury has actually been seated, testimony yet again underway. What's the gentleman that we're looking at now? Tell us his story.
He is a police officer. I believe from what he said, he was not in the building at the time of the murder, but we're seeing a lot of his body camera footage. We're actually not hearing we weren't hearing the audio earlier today, so we're not really sure what the gist of this that the defense is going for, but I'm sure we'll find out when they have the questioning and cross-examination.
Yeah, well, when it comes to questioning and cross-examination, perhaps no one does it better than Mr. Dante Mills. He's also joining us yet again as we focus on all things with regard to Mr. Banfield. Dante, always good to see you, sir. Welcome to the show. So, Dante, obviously, yet again, we're looking at Mr. Banfield, live footage, if you will, and, well, he seems somewhat perplexed. This is the face, Vernon and Dante, that we have seen time and time again. A man who looks somewhat distraught, and rightfully so, Dante.
Yes, at the end of the day, no matter if he was in another relationship, you would believe that no one wants to see their wife killed. I don't think there's a dispute that he was in that other relationship, but that doesn't mean, again, that he wanted to see his wife die. If you are a human being, right? Except for if you committed the murder. And that's the interesting take that we got from yesterday. There were tears where it looked as if he was crying. There's been a dispute. I've been following this, whether or not it looked like it was fabricated or looked like it was forced crying. But I think it was clear that he wanted to make the jury understand that he was sad that his wife was gone. That's something that I talk about with my clients. I generally tell them not to show emotion because it's hard to predict how that emotion is going to be taken in by the jury. And I tell the jury at the beginning of the trial that I told my client not to show any emotion so they won't hold it against my client. Because the last thing you want is your client to cry or something like that, and it to seem fake or contrived because then they lose all credibility and the jury just doesn't like them.
I'm really curious what you think about this, because when I watched that yesterday and you see this man crying there, a lot of people here had that same assumption you were just talking about where, oh, it's coached by the defense, oh, he's faking it. But I was thinking, if this man is innocent, he is re-listening to the moment where he finds out his wife is dead. And it got me thinking about the way that we talk about, these cases. Do you think people tend to be predisposed to believe the prosecution's story when they're covering these kinds of stories? Because when I talk to people here, it seems like everybody's already assuming that he's guilty.
Well, I think part of the assumption is the facts that they hear. Yeah. That's why the court of public opinion is a little bit different and should be than the court of law. The court of public opinion, we've heard the narrative, right, about this other relationship and things like that. And I think that made people make up their minds as to whether or not he was guilty or innocent without hearing all of the evidence. That's why we had the jury come in, present them all of the evidence, and they decide. but there are going to be people on the outside who they're going to base their minds only on what they've heard on TV or what they've seen in the newspaper. This is a well-covered case. So they may have made their minds up already, and they may read into the tears to believe they're fake only because they think he committed the murder. But you will hope that the jury has a blank slate, that they're coming in and not making up their mind until they hear all of the evidence. But we're still human beings, and they're going to read that emotion one way or the other. Part of their job is to look at the witnesses, to evaluate the witnesses, but also to evaluate the defendant as they sit in that chair and see if it looks as if they're being truthful in their demeanor. That's a part of the jury's assessment, and they have every right to do that.
So the fact that this whole scenario is fairly outlandish, that it's a big, allegedly a big setup, you know, involving this like catfishing and all of that stuff. Do you think that kind of extravagant setup, do you think that makes the audience, that court of public opinion, more likely to believe it or more likely to be skeptical?
Well, it makes it more juicy, right?
Yeah.
More likely to tune in for sure. And I'm sure Guy appreciates that, although we love watching Guy no matter what he's talking about. But yes, this is a juicy story because of all of those details and everything that went into this plot, if in fact it was a murder plot. But when you have something so elaborate, there's going to be holes in that story because you can't fill in every gap. And that may lead people to be more skeptical, as the defense was trying to do, point out one or two things, like them not being able to move blood around to say, now this whole story doesn't make sense. If I can prove that this gap is present and they can't fill it, then you can't find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So that does play into the defense's hands a bit, because in that elaborate story, they don't have to take every piece away. They just have to poke some holes and say, if there's holes there, then you can't acquit. You can't find them guilty. You have to acquit.
Yeah. Dante, obviously the trial resumed earlier than usual today, 9:30 to be exact, and according to Vernon and several others, perhaps it will end a tad bit later today, all because, well, to our understanding, the judge wants it to go to the jury because of the pending snowstorm. Has that happened before? Is that standard? And if I happen to be a part of that jury, I'm saying, well, hey, perhaps you're rushing me. I need some time in order to make a correct judgment.
Well, it's a combination. I can tell you it is standard. There's always the scale that you're weighing of being practical, and you want to keep in mind the juror's time, but you also want to give both sides the opportunity to flush out their case, and you don't want to rush their case. In this situation, based on the judge's schedule, based on the anticipated snowstorm, they may have 3 or 4 days off, and that's a long time. So it would make sense for the judge to say, if there's a way we can get this done now, not by telling the defense they can't call a witness, but by staying until 5 o'clock as opposed to 4:30, or starting at 9:30 as opposed to 10, let's do that so we can fit it in. It's more practical for everybody. We don't want the jury to have over the weekend plus the 3 or 4 days. You're talking about a 5 or 6 day break from the last time they heard testimony, where some things won't be fresh in their mind. So I think it is practical to try and get this done, and it does happen all the time. Judges look at the schedule, they look at what jurors have going on, they look at the trial and say, how can we be efficient?
That kind of break that we're talking about, where it may be several days between the last day of testimony and some of the arguments, does that tend to favor the defense or the prosecution? Does it have one leaning one way or the other? And if you're a defense attorney in this situation, how do you overcome that?
Well, if you're a defense attorney in this situation, you want to make sure you end strong. If you know, well, both sides, if you know they're going to have a long break coming up, what I would do is I would stuff the end of that with what I think is the most important information, because that's what's going to last in their minds. When they come back after those days and when they deliberate, they have the opportunity to ask for readback of testimony if they've forgotten something. But generally, they're going to have the most important points in their mind. Those are the things they're not going to forget. So I want to make sure I end with a bang, give them something they can hold on to even for 5 or 6 days. So when I come back, I know that they remember that one point that I think is important.
Dante, you made mention of ending strong, and this is how we'll end this. I'm curious, the prosecution and or the defense, have either side brought something strong to the table thus far that really caught your attention?
Yes, I do like the witness that was presented yesterday, talking about the blood splatter. That opens up the door to say, were the cops trying to fit this into a box that really just doesn't fit? Were they looking for Banfield to be the guilty party after everything came out? you're giving the jury an opportunity to discredit the investigation. And that's huge when you talk about these cases. We talked about how elaborate it is, how many officers, investigators were involved. You're giving the opportunity to the jury to say, if you don't want to believe this, here's a reason that you can hang your hat and say, well, they talked about blood that it's impossible to move around. So now I can't believe anything they say. You want to, as a defense attorney, you want to give the jury something to hang their hat on, and that's something concrete because it's coming from an expert.
Yeah, yet again coming from an expert commentary with regard to Mr. Dante Mills. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, my friend.
Have a good afternoon, guys.
All right. So, Vernon, obviously, we're going to have to keep a close eye on this. We know our very own Bob Barnard inside the courtroom. He will join us shortly before, I would assume before 1. Now that they started early, they will probably break early.
Yeah, I'm hoping that he knows more about Friday. They didn't talk about that on the videos so far. They may have said something in the courtroom, so I'm very eager to hear from Bob if we're going to be doing this tomorrow.
Well, you're eager to hear from Bob. I'm eager to hear what's happening inside the courtroom. Let's take you right now inside the Brendan Banfield courtroom trial.